Desperate, a bankrupt millionaire left his own company aimlessly after being betrayed and expelled. In shock, he tripped over his own step and bumped harshly into a street boy who did not look away. "Uncle, I know how to save your company." He froze, shocked by what he had just heard. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more exciting stories like this one, and leave a like on the video to keep it going. The sound of leather shoes against the marble floor echoed through the immense corridor, each heavy step as if Henry Albuquerque was walking to his own execution. Sweat accumulated under the collar of his business shirt, and the air felt heavy. His heart hammered strongly in his chest. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He pushed open the glass doors of the meeting room, and the impact was immediate. The tense silence, the cold stares. His lawyers were on one side of the table, board members on the other, but nothing hit him as hard as the figure seated in the center. Maurice Vasconcelos, his former assistant, the man he had trained himself, who was once his right hand, now occupying a place that shouldn't be his. Henry froze for a second. This couldn't be happening. "What's going on?" His voice came out harder than expected, but laden with tension he couldn't disguise. Maurice adjusted his tie with the calmness of someone who had already won. "Henry, I regret to inform you that the company's situation is worse than we imagined." Two lawyers slid a stack of papers in his direction. Reports, statements, debts. The pages trembled slightly in his hands as he stared at the documents. With each line he read, a knot formed in his stomach, a crushing weight. "This can't be right," he muttered, his throat dry. "Unfortunately, it is," one of the shareholders interrupted without any trace of empathy. "There's evidence that the company is insolvent." Henry raised his eyes seeking support, but found only impassive expressions. "You led us to bankruptcy," another shareholder completed, crossing his arms. The words hit Henry like a punch to the chest. He swallowed hard. "This is a mistake." His voice faltered for a second, but then hardened. "I checked the numbers. This isn't possible." Maurice sighed theatrically. "You can check again, but the banks won't wait. Tax executions have already been initiated. Your assets are frozen." The world spun for a moment. The air seemed thin. How had this happened? How had no one warned him? He tried to pull from memory the contracts, the transactions, but everything seemed a blur. Henry closed his hands into fists. Whatever was happening wasn't a mistake. It was a coup. "This is a trap," he said finally, his voice laden with anger. "And I'll prove it." A muffled laugh came from the other side of the table. "Prove it?" One of the shareholders raised an eyebrow mockingly. "You have 48 hours to present a solution, Henry, or else the company will be dissolved." Henry looked around. Not a single look of solidarity, not even a gesture of hesitation. Everyone had already chosen a side, and it wasn't his. When he left the building, the world seemed distant. The sounds of the city, horns, voices, engines, mixed into a muffled buzz. The ground seemed unstable beneath his feet. His empire was crumbling, and he had no one. "Sir, I know how to save your company." Henry stopped mid-step. What the hell was that? He blinked several times before turning his head. A thin street boy, worn clothes, but with a look too sharp for someone his age. Henry almost ignored him. He was just some kid. But something in the tone of voice, in the certainty with which he said those words. He turned completely. "What did you say?" His forehead furrowed. The boy crossed his arms, opening a confident smile. "I said, I know how to save your company." Henry let out an ironic laugh, shaking his head. Great. Now he was accepting advice from a street kid. "And how would you know that?" "Because I know who deceived you," the boy said. Henry's mind locked up. The air got colder. How the hell did this kid know about the betrayal? His heart raced. He had to hear this. Henry approached, narrowing his eyes. "Who are you?" The boy raised his chin defiantly. "My name is Kyle, and if you want my help, you have to buy me a hamburger first." Henry stared at the boy before him, chaos still spinning in his mind. The shareholders pressuring him, the lawyers warning him, the company on the verge of collapse. And now, a street kid appearing out of nowhere, claiming to know something that could save him. "You're joking with me," Henry said, crossing his arms. Kyle smiled sideways, not seeming offended. "I never joke when it comes to food." "So, how about that hamburger?" Henry massaged his temples. What was he doing saying this? It was ridiculous. He needed a plan, not conversations with some random kid. But what if there was something there? Something he was ignoring? Huffing, he looked around and saw a simple restaurant across the street. "Let's get this over with." Kyle opened a victorious smile and followed Henry across the street between the cars. Inside the restaurant, Kyle devoured a hamburger and French fries as if he hadn't eaten in days. Henry observed impatiently. "Now speak. What do you know?" Kyle wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "First, you need to stop trusting Morris." The name made Henry's muscles go rigid. "What about him?" "I've seen that guy do wrong things," Kyle said, grabbing another fry. "Things I know you didn't know about." Henry clenched his fists on the table. "What do you mean you saw?" "I kept an eye out. I slept near your building. I knew everything about your company. One night, I saw Maurice and another guy getting out of a car and talking about dirty money." Henry felt his stomach turn. "And you have proof?" Kyle shrugged. "I'm not a detective, sir, but I know who can help you." Henry breathed deeply. This could be an opportunity, or a waste of time. "Who?" "Lauren," Kyle answered. Henry went still. Lauren's name hit hard. "No," he said immediately. "That's not an option." Kyle arched an eyebrow. "Huh, I thought you wanted to save the company." Henry felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He and Lauren hadn't ended well. She was a talented employee, dedicated, but he had fired her unjustly. "She hates me," Kyle laughed. "Great. That means she has a reason to want to mess with Maurice." Henry breathed deeply. Damn, the kid had a point. He took out his phone and dialed the number he hadn't called in years. Ringing 1, 2, 3 times. Henry felt a knot in his stomach while waiting. Maybe she wouldn't answer. Maybe she had changed her number. Click. "Who is this?" Lauren's voice came dry, impersonal. Henry closed his eyes for a second before responding. "It's me." The silence on the other end was heavy. "What do you want, Henry?" He swallowed hard. He wasn't the type to ask for help. Never was. But now he needed her. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." Lauren laughed without humor. "Now you want to talk? After 3 years?" Henry massaged his forehead, trying to keep calm. "I made mistakes, I know that. But it's important. You'll want to hear this." Another silence, then a tired sigh. "Meet me at Napoli Cafe in an hour." Click. Henry sat there with the phone in his hand, the feeling of returning to the past suffocating him, but he had no choice. It was time to face his past to save his future. The bell above the door chimed when Henry entered the cozy corner cafe. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, mixed with the light aroma of freshly baked bread. And there she was, Lauren, sitting at a table near the window, arms crossed, her gaze hard. Time hadn't changed her much. The same brown hair tied in a ponytail, the same sharp eyes that always saw beyond the obvious. But now there was something different, a kind of definitive distrust. Henry approached and sat across from her. "You look great." He tried to break the ice. Lauren arched an eyebrow. "And you look like a man who lost everything." Henry laughed through his nose. "Well, I haven't lost everything yet." She tilted her head. "Then speak quickly, Henry. What could be so important that you'd call me after years?" He breathed deeply. There was no other way to say it. Maurice stole my company. She frowned, surprised. What do you mean? Henry explained everything, the reports, the sudden debt, the meeting at the office, and finally, the most unexpected detail. A street kid told me he saw strange things. He slept near the company building and heard Maurice talking about dirty money. Lauren blinked several times. You trusted a street kid? Kyle isn't just any kid. He knew about you, knew that you could help me. She let out a disbelieving laugh. You fired me without even blinking, Henry? And now you want my help? Henry held her gaze firmly. Because you're the only person who wouldn't sell their soul for a scheme like this. For a moment, Lauren remained silent, then sighed. If Maurice did this, he must have left traces. He was never careful enough. Henry nodded. Do you still have access to some old documents? Anything that could prove he diverted money? Lauren bit her lower lip thoughtfully. I have some archived files, but if you want something solid, we'll need to risk a bit more. Henry felt a shiver down his spine. What do you mean? Lauren took a sip of coffee before responding. We need to enter the company building. Henry's heart skipped a beat. Breaking into his own company, it had come to this. But looking at Lauren's determined expression, he knew she was right. They needed concrete evidence, and it wouldn't be found in old archived files. What they needed was current, damning proof of Maurice's betrayal. Henry leaned forward, lowering his voice. How do we do this? Lauren's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I still know the building's layout. There's a server room on the 6th floor where they keep all the financial record. And you can access it? Lauren nodded slowly. The passwords haven't changed since I worked in IT. But Henry, she paused, her expression growing serious. If we get caught, there's no coming back from this. Henry looked at his hands, then back at Lauren. 3 years ago, he had ruined her career without a second thought. Now, she was willing to risk everything to help him. The irony wasn't lost on him. Why are you really helping me, Lauren? She stared at him for a long moment before answering. Because sometimes the right thing and revenge look exactly the same. Their coffee had gone cold, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy planning how to break into one of the most secure buildings in the city. And somewhere in the back of Henry's mind, a voice whispered that this was just the beginning. The car parked a few meters from the Albuquerque Corp building. Henry looked at the illuminated facade with a bitter sense of nostalgia. This place had been his home for years. Now it was a battlefield. Kyle, sitting in the back seat, looked anxiously at Lauren. So, what's the plan? She pulled out a tablet and showed the building's map. Access to the database can still be done from inside the server on the 6th floor. But someone needs to go in there for that. Henry crossed his arms. Someone like me? Lauren shook her head. You're the worst option. Morris must already have someone watching you. Kyle raised his hand as if he were in school. I can go. No way. Henry and Lauren responded at the same time. Kyle huffed. I've already slept in that building. I know the dark corners, the less busy corridors. Lauren looked at Henry. He's right. If Kyle can access one of the workstations, I can hack into the system remotely. Henry felt a bitter taste in his mouth. Putting a kid at risk? But what was the alternative? He looked at Kyle. Are you sure you want to do this? The boy gave a cocky smile. Sir, I was born for this. Just before midnight, Kyle crossed the street and entered through the back of the building. Lauren and Henry watched from afar, following everything on the tablet. Henry's heart seemed like a drum in his chest. He shouldn't be doing this. Lauren kept her eyes on the screen. It's done now. Just pray it works out. Kyle's voice came through the improvised earpiece. I'm in. There's a security guard in the corridor. I'll wait. Henry clenched his fists. Time seemed to drag on. Finally, Kyle's voice returned. Okay, I'm in the office. I have a computer on. I'll connect to Lauren. Lauren typed rapidly. I'm in. I'll look for compromising files. Time passed agonizingly. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Kyle! Henry whispered desperately. Lauren's screen flickered. Got it! Run, kid! Henry ordered through the earpiece. They heard a door opening and a loud noise. Silence. Henry felt the air missing. Kyle? Nothing. Kyle? Henry's heart hammered in his chest. He exchanged a desperate look with Lauren. Damn! The silence on the earpiece was deafening. Heart racing, cold sweat running down his neck. He pressed the small earpiece as if that would make Kyle respond. Kyle. Answer me, kid. Lauren stared fixedly at the laptop screen where the access to the company server was still open. Was he caught? She asked, her voice low, tense. Henry didn't know, and that terrified him. Suddenly, a muffled noise sounded in the earpiece. I'm good, sir. Kyle's voice came whispered, charged with adrenaline. Almost got caught, but I hid inside the cleaning supplies closet. Henry let out a sigh of relief and ran his hand over his face, but the tension continued hammering in his head. Never do that again. Relax, Kyle chuckled softly. I'm used to it. Can I get out now? Lauren was still typing frantically on the laptop. We have a problem, she said. Henry turned to her, his breathing accelerated. What? Lauren bit her lower lip and turned the laptop screen so he could see. The files we got aren't just about Maurice's financial diversions. There's something bigger here, much bigger. Henry narrowed his eyes and analyzed the screen. It was a spreadsheet of financial transactions, but the values were absurdly high. Much more money than any internal fraud would explain. This doesn't make sense. Lauren looked at Henry, her expression grave. This isn't just money diversion. It looks like money laundering. Henry's stomach turned. Maurice is involved in something much worse than we imagined. In the earpiece, Kyle's voice got lower, almost a desperate whisper. Damn. Henry tensed up. What is it? 2 security guards entered the floor. They're searching everything. Henry looked at Lauren with a pale face. If they find him, we're done for. Kyle breathed deeply in the earpiece. I'll try to get out through the side corridor. Let me know if you see anything in the system. Lauren typed as fast as she could. They're closer to the main staircase. There's time if you're quick. Kyle moved. Henry could hear his panting breath. Suddenly, a metallic noise, an object falling. What the hell was that? Henry muttered, feeling despair spread. Sorry, bumped into a cleaning cart. Kyle responded softly. Henry held his breath, then a sound that froze his spine. Hey, what was that? The deep voice of one of the security guards echoed through the earpiece. Lauren widened her eyes. Kyle, get out of there now. Henry stood up from his chair, pressing the earpiece in his ear. Kyle, run! Calm down, Kyle whispered. I'm sneaking through the back. Henry couldn't breathe. He clenched his fists, feeling completely powerless. The boy was alone, surrounded, and all he could do was listen. The security guard's voice got closer. Check the corridor. Silence fell over the earpiece. Henry felt his chest tighten. Kyle, he called, his voice almost hoarse. Nothing. Kyle. The silence lasted seconds that seemed like an eternity. Then finally, ventilation ducked. Henry released the air he hadn't even realized he was holding. Never do that again. Kyle chuckled softly. I'm almost out. Just a bit more. Lauren kept her eyes on the company's system. They're checking the floors now. If you don't get out quickly, it could get bad. Kyle continued crawling. Henry bit his nail, his heart pounding in his chest. Then a sound that made him freeze. One of the security guards' radios crackled. Mr. Vasconcelos asked us to reinforce surveillance. Looks like we have a rat in the building. Henry's blood froze. Maurice already knew, and that meant they were at much greater risk. "Out," Kyle whispered in the earpiece. "I'm on the ground floor. I'll leave through the side door." Henry exchanged a look with Lauren. He felt something was wrong. "Kyle, see if anyone's waiting for you at the exit." Seconds later, the response came laden with tension. "Damn, there's a guard right at the door." Henry breathed deeply, thinking quickly. "Okay, listen to me. Is he looking where?" "At the parking lot." "Then you're going to walk normally. Keep your head down, but don't run. Act like you're just passing by. Are you sure about this? If you run out, he'll know. Go now." The earpiece went silent for a few seconds. Henry could barely contain his anxiety. Then a final message came, followed by the sound of a door creaking in the background. "I made it." Henry finally breathed for real. Seconds later, Kyle turned the corner with a victorious smile on his face. "Too easy." Henry rolled his eyes and pulled Kyle by the arm. "Never do that again." Kyle laughed. "You're the one who asked." Lauren closed the laptop and looked at the two. "We need to leave here now." Henry looked at the cafe where they were and felt a chill. If Maurice was suspicious, it could be just a matter of time until he discovered everything. He looked at the car and made a decision. Let's go somewhere safer. On the way to Lauren's apartment, the gravity of what they'd discovered weighed heavily in the car. Kyle was the first to break the silence. "So, what exactly did we find?" Lauren glanced at the laptop in her lap. "Evidence of a massive money laundering operation. The numbers are astronomical." Henry gripped the steering wheel tighter. "And Maurice is just a piece of it." "A big piece," Lauren added. "But you're right. There are other players involved. Important people." Kyle leaned forward between the seats. "Like who?" Lauren opened the laptop again, the screen's blue light illuminating her face in the dark car. "There's a name that keeps appearing in the transactions. Edward Viller." Henry nearly swerved the car. "The construction magnate?" Lauren nodded grimly. "The same. His companies have been winning every major government contract for the past 5 years. And now we know why," Henry muttered. "The question is," Lauren closed the laptop, "what do we do with this information?" Henry turned onto a quiet street, his mind racing. "We need to be careful. These people, they're not just businessmen. They're powerful, connected." Kyle snorted from the back seat. "So what?" "We have proof now." Henry caught the boy's eye in the rearview mirror. "It's not that simple, Kyle. These people, they can make evidence disappear. They can make people disappear." The words hung heavy in the car. Lauren touched Henry's arm lightly. "We need a plan. A real one." Henry nodded, turning into the parking garage of Lauren's apartment building. "And we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks," Lauren finished. As they rode the elevator up to Lauren's apartment, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that they were now involved in something far more dangerous than they'd initially imagined. This wasn't just about saving his company anymore. They had stumbled onto something much bigger, much more sinister. And somewhere in London, in a luxurious office, Maurice Vasconcelos was probably already planning his next move. Lauren's apartment was modest but functional, with walls covered in computer screens and technical books. Kyle immediately made himself at home, raiding her kitchen while Henry and Lauren spread the evidence across her dining table. "Look at this!" Lauren pointed to a series of transactions. Every major payment from Villar's companies was routed through a shell corporation called Shalom Capital. Henry leaned closer, studying the numbers. "And Maurice handled all these transactions?" "Not directly." Lauren pulled up another document. "He used a network of offshore accounts to hide the money trail. But there's something else." She clicked through several files before finding what she was looking for. These dates coincide with the announcements of major government infrastructure projects. Henry's eyes widened as the pieces started falling into place. They were rigging the bids. Wheeler's companies always won because they knew exactly what to bid, Lauren finished. And Maurice used my company to launder the money. Kyle returned with an armful of snacks, dropping them on the table. So your company was just a front? Henry ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I was so focused on the profits, on expansion. I never questioned where all the extra money was coming from. Lauren touched his arm sympathetically. Maurice took advantage of your trust. He knew you'd never look too closely at the numbers as long as the company was growing. But why now? Kyle asked through a mouthful of crisps. Why take over the company? Lauren's eyes lit up with realization. Because of the new government audit requirements. Starting next month, all companies involved in public contracts will be subject to enhanced scrutiny. They needed to get rid of me before that happened, Henry said quietly. Make me the scapegoat, if anything was discovered. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. They weren't just dealing with corporate fraud. This was systematic corruption at the highest levels. Henry stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline. We need to talk to Villar. Lauren nearly choked on her coffee. Are you insane? He's one of the most powerful men in the country. Exactly. Henry turned back to face them. He's also the key to everything. If we can get him to turn on Maurice. Kyle sat up straighter. But why would he help us? Henry smiled grimly. Because men like Villar always have a contingency plan. And I bet he has evidence against Maurice that he keeps for insurance. Lauren considered this. Even if you're right, how do we get to him? It's not like you can just walk into his office. No, Henry pulled out his phone. But I know someone who can get us a meeting. He dialed a number, waiting as it rang. James, it's Henry Albuquerque. I need a favor. The next day, Henry found himself walking into one of London's most exclusive clubs. Edward Villar was waiting in a private room, nursing a glass of scotch. He looked exactly like his photos in the financial magazines, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the confident air of a man accustomed to power. Henry Albuquerque. Villar smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I must admit, I'm curious about what could bring you here. Henry sat down across from him, declining the offered drink. I know about Shalom Capital. The smile on Villar's face flickered for just a moment, but it was enough. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. Henry placed a USB drive on the table. It's a fact. I have proof of everything. The rigged contracts, the money laundering, Maurice's involvement. Villar picked up the drive, turning it in his hands. And what exactly do you hope to achieve with this? Henry leaned forward. Maurice betrayed me. He's going to betray you too. Is that so? Villar's voice was dangerously soft. And why would you think that? Because he's already starting to move money out of Shalom Capital into accounts you don't control. This made Villar pause. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his glass. Prove it. Henry pulled out his phone, showing Villar the transactions they'd discovered. For a long moment, there was silence as Villar studied the numbers. When he looked up, his eyes had lost their amused glint. What do you want? I want Maurice gone. I want my company back. Villar leaned back, studying Henry. You're either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Albuquerque. Maybe both, Henry admitted. But I'm also right. Villar took a long sip of his scotch before speaking again. Maurice has become unpredictable lately, a liability. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. This is the address where he keeps his personal files, the ones he thinks nobody knows about. Henry took the envelope, his heart racing. Why are you helping me? Villar smiled, but this time it was cold, calculated. Let's just say I prefer to choose the timing of my battles. As Henry left the club, his phone buzzed with a message from Lauren. got into Maurice's personal email. You need to see this. Now. The game was changing, and for the first time, Henry felt like they might actually have a chance to win. Henry burst into Lauren's apartment, his heart still racing from the meeting with Villiers. She was hunched over her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. Kyle paced nervously behind her. "What did you find?" Henry asked, dropping his coat on a chair. Lauren looked up, her expression grave. "You're not going to believe this. Rachel's involved." Henry felt the floor shift beneath his feet. "Rachel? My ex-wife?" Lauren turned the laptop toward him. "She's been working with Maurice from the beginning. Look at these emails." Henry scanned the screen, his stomach turning with each line he read. The emails detailed years of careful planning, of deliberate manipulation. Rachel had been feeding Maurice information about Henry's business decisions, helping him lay the groundwork for the takeover. "All this time?" Henry whispered, sinking into a chair. "She was part of it." Kyle stopped his pacing. "But why? I mean, wasn't she, like, rich, too?" Lauren pulled up another document. Because Maurice promised her something bigger. After they got rid of Henry, she was supposed to take over the European division of the company. Henry laughed bitterly. "She always was ambitious." "There's more," Lauren said, typing rapidly. "Rachel's been moving money too. Large sums, through accounts that even Maurice doesn't know about." Kyle leaned over her shoulder. "So she's playing both sides?" "Smart woman," Lauren muttered. "She must have known Maurice would try to get rid of her too, eventually." Henry stood up, walking to the window. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious to the schemes and betrayals happening in the towers above. "We need to talk to her." Lauren spun in her chair. "Are you insane? She'll warn Maurice immediately." "No," Henry turned back to them, a plan forming in his mind. "She won't. Because we're going to give her exactly what she wants. A way out." The next morning found Henry sitting in an upscale cafe, waiting. Rachel arrived precisely on time, as always. She looked elegant and composed, but Henry could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her hands as she sat down. "Henry," she said coolly, "this is unexpected." "Is it?" He pushed a folder across the table. "Or were you waiting for this moment?" Rachel opened the folder, her face paling slightly as she saw the contents. "Where did you get these? Does it matter?" Henry leaned forward. "What matters is what happens next." Rachel closed the folder carefully. "Are you threatening me, Henry?" "No," he smiled slightly. "I'm offering you a choice." He pulled out another document. "Maurice is planning to betray you. He's already moving money out of your joint accounts." Rachel's perfectly manicured nails dug into the leather of her handbag. "You're lying." "Am I?" Henry showed her his phone, displaying the transaction records Lauren had uncovered. "He's cutting you out, Rachel. Just like he did to me." For a long moment, Rachel said nothing, her mind clearly racing behind her carefully composed expression. Finally, she looked up at him. "What do you want?" "The truth. All of it. Everything you know about Maurice's operation." Rachel laughed, but it was hollow. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Henry. These people, they're not just businessmen." "I know about Villiers," Henry said quietly. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. "Then you know how dangerous this is. I also know that when this all comes crashing down, you don't want to be standing too close to Maurice." Rachel took a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. "He has files," she said finally. "Evidence that could destroy everyone involved. He keeps them in a secure location." Henry leaned forward. "Where?" Rachel pulled out her phone, typing something. "I'm sending you an address." "But Henry..." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw real fear in her eyes. "Be careful. Maurice won't just come after you. He'll come after everyone you care about." As Henry left the cafe, his phone buzzed. A message from Lauren. got movement at Maurice's office. He's calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. Another message followed quickly. Kyle found something in the building plans. There's a way in. Henry started the car, his mind racing. They had less than 24 hours to set their trap. And this time, they couldn't afford to fail. Back at Lauren's apartment, they gathered around her dining table, now covered in building plans and security protocols. Kyle pointed to a maintenance entrance. Here, the cameras have a 3-second blind spot during shift changes. Lauren nodded, typing on her laptop. I can loop the security feed, but we'll only have a small window. Henry studied the plans. How long? 10 minutes, maximum, Lauren replied. After that, the system will reset. Kyle grinned. 10 minutes to save your company and expose a massive conspiracy? No pressure. Henry couldn't help but smile. A few months ago, he had been a successful businessman who thought he had everything figured out. Now he was planning a break-in with a former employee and a street kid. Life had a strange way of showing you what really mattered. One more thing, Lauren said, her expression serious. I found something in Rachel's email. Tomorrow isn't just a board meeting. Maurice is planning to announce the company's dissolution. Once that happens, it's over. Henry finished. We'll lose everything. So, Kyle clapped his hands together. What's the plan, boss? Henry looked at the two people who had risked everything to help him, who had believed in him when he had nothing left. We're going to give Maurice exactly what he wants, a chance to confess. Lauren raised an eyebrow. And how exactly are we going to do that? Henry pulled out the envelope Viller had given him by using his own insurance policy against him. As they worked late into the night, finalizing every detail of their plan, Henry couldn't shake Rachel's warning from his mind. Maurice wouldn't just come after him. He would try to destroy everyone involved. But looking at Lauren and Kyle, working tirelessly to help him, Henry made a silent vow. This time, he wouldn't let anyone else pay for his mistakes. This time, he would protect them, no matter the cost. The morning sun cast long shadows across London's financial district as Henry parked his car near the Albuquerque Corp building. Lauren was monitoring everything from her laptop, while Kyle waited in position near the maintenance entrance. Henry adjusted his tie, checking his hidden recording device one last time. Remember, Lauren's voice came through his earpiece, we need Maurice's confession. Without it, all our evidence could be disputed. Henry nodded, though she couldn't see him. How much time? Security shift changes in 3 minutes. That's your window. He took a deep breath, thinking about how far they'd come. From that first moment when Kyle had stopped him on the street, to Lauren's unwavering support, to Rachel's surprising revelation, it had all led to this moment. Ready? Kyle's excited whisper came through the comms. Henry smiled despite his nerves. Let's finish this. The maintenance entrance opened silently, thanks to Kyle's expertise with locks. Henry moved quickly through the service corridors, Lauren guiding him past security cameras. He reached the executive floor just as the board members were arriving for the emergency meeting. Maurice stood at the head of the conference table, looking confident and composed. When he saw Henry, his smile barely faltered. Henry, this is a surprise. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Henry walked calmly to the center of the room. Is it? I thought you'd be expecting me. Maurice's eyes narrowed slightly. The meeting hasn't started yet. Security will escort you out. Before you do that, Henry pulled out a USB drive. You might want to see what's on this. He connected it to the room's presentation screen. Documents began appearing. Transaction records, emails, offshore accounts. Maurice's smile disappeared completely. What is this? Everything, Henry said simply. Shalom Capital, the rigged contracts, your deals with VR. The board members began murmuring among themselves. Maurice raised his hand for silence. These are obviously fabricated documents. Henry is attempting to... They're not fabricated, a new voice said from the doorway. Rachel walked in, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I can verify everything. Maurice's face darkened. Rachel, what are you doing? She smiled coldly, choosing the right side for once. Through his earpiece, Henry heard Lauren's urgent whisper. Security's on the move. 3 minutes max. He had to work fast. It's over, Maurice. Villar gave us everything. Your private files, the ones you kept as insurance. We have those too. For the first time, real fear flashed across Maurice's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Henry pulled out his phone, playing a recording of his conversation with Villar. Maurice's facade finally cracked. You fool, he snarled. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Actually, I do. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A man so obsessed with power that he betrayed everyone who trusted him. The board members were now openly staring at Maurice, their expressions a mix of shock and disgust. Security's almost there, Lauren warned. Finish it! Henry stepped closer to Maurice. You have one chance. Confess now, or everything goes to the authorities. Every document, every transaction, every deal. Maurice's eyes darted around the room, calculating. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. You want a confession? Fine. Yes, I took your company. Yes, I orchestrated everything. Because you never deserved it, Henry. You were too weak, too trusting. I made this company what it is. By breaking the law, one of the board members interjected. By turning us into a money laundering operation? Maurice spun to face them. I made us profitable. Every contract, every deal. He stopped suddenly, realizing what he'd done. Henry smiled grimly. Thank you, Maurice. That's all we needed. The doors burst open as security arrived, but instead of removing Henry, they stood uncertain, looking between him and Maurice. Rachel stepped forward. I believe the board needs to vote on new leadership. The next few hours passed in a blur. The board voted unanimously to remove Maurice from his position. Rachel provided additional evidence of his illegal activities. By sunset, Maurice Vasconcelos was being escorted from the building, his empire crumbling around him. Later that evening, Henry sat in his old office, now his again, looking out over the city. Lauren and Kyle sprawled on the leather couch, sharing a celebratory pizza. So, Kyle said between bites, what happens now? Henry turned to face them. Now we rebuild, but differently this time. He walked to his desk and pulled out 2 envelopes. Lauren, I want you to head our new technology division. Full autonomy, your own team. Her eyes widened as she read the offer letter. Henry, this is what you deserve. And Kyle, the boy sat up straighter. I don't want a job, unless it involves driving your car. Henry laughed. How about an education instead? Full scholarship, any school you want. Kyle stared at the papers, his usual quick wit failing him. You're serious? Completely. You two saved more than just my company. You saved me. Lauren raised her coffee cup. To new beginnings? To family, Henry corrected, looking at the 2 people who had become so much more than just allies. Outside, London's lights twinkled in the gathering dusk. In the boardroom, decisions were already being made about the company's new direction. Transparent, ethical, focused on more than just profit. And in his office, Henry Albuquerque finally understood that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. 6 months later, Albuquerque Corp had transformed. The company's new social responsibility program, inspired by Kyle's story, was helping street kids across London. Lauren's technology division was revolutionizing how they did business. And Henry? He had never been happier. One morning, as he walked into the office, he passed the security desk where Kyle was arguing with Lauren about his university applications. Rachel was in the conference room, helping transition the company's European operations. The empire he'd built hadn't been destroyed after all. It had been transformed into something better. His phone buzzed with a message. Another newspaper wanted to interview him about the company's transformation. The Fall and Rise of Henry Albuquerque, a story of redemption. He smiled, declining the request. Some stories weren't about the headlines. They were about the quiet moments, the small changes, the unlikely friendships that changed everything. And his story? It was just beginning.